everyone, I'm Laura Paquette, and I'm just back from 2 months in Italy. So excited! I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that for two main reasons. One is that research works. I wrote a book set in ancient Rome. I did a ton of research on it, and then obviously I went over. So I looked around, kind of tried to see what I didn't know, came back to see what I can fix, and there were very few changes. And there was a lot of research, but it works. Like, you don't have to spend all this money doing things you can't afford. If you have a computer, you're all right. And even better than a computer is a library, because when you're looking things up, you have to know what you don't know. But if you go to a library, you go to a bookstore, the writer's going to tell you, and that helps direct your research later on. But more pertinent to this video is the relationship between art in general, specifically Renaissance arts versus, not versus, but in conjunction with the written word. And when I was considering these very two different mediums, it got me thinking about art in general, and what art means, what I could learn from this very different medium, this very different context. And so I created this working definition. Art is a thought-provoking depiction evoking a specific emotion, usually through narrative. Usually through narrative is more geared toward writing, but really everything has a story. And the main part of that is that writing art is a whole body response. You have the thought-provoking part, it's your mind, but depiction. Depiction means that this is not a speech. This is not something you've just been told or kind of forced upon you. This is something that comes in through the senses. But that's weird for writing, because if you look at a book, you see the squiggles on a page. Those squiggles, that is not the art. You can listen to an audiobook, that voice, that is not the art. It's not like in visual art where there's a scene you can see. It's not like in music where your senses take in the music. All the sensory details, all that depiction comes from your own mind, through your imagination. And so writing is already different from any other medium, because the author is doing all this heavy lifting, but they're doing it so that the reader can enter into this joint enterprise. And then lastly, obviously everyone knows that it's a depiction evoking a specific emotion. I said, specific for a reason, but it's not that you get to kind of just beat your reader over the head with it. The specific emotion is not necessarily yours, or not necessarily like the readers. It's something that comes in through the characters, and because the medium is the imagination, the emotion comes from not only the depiction but from the characters. It's just a practice in empathy almost. Then a side note, kind of off the empathy thing, is that I think this is what well-intentioned writers get wrong about having morals in your story, is that art isn't just an emotion, it's thought-provoking. If you look at romance and mystery, those are the two best-selling genres. And both of them have this element of the reader figuring things out. So in a romance, the main character will kind of interact with some people, and you have to kind of figure out who's going to be the love interest. And in mystery, obviously, you have to figure out what's going on. And these best-selling genres are the most almost reader dependent. It's something that the reader has to figure out. And when you have a moral in your story, it works best when the reader is figuring it out. And it's also, if assuming you're saying something true, but you say it in an untrue context, it's no longer true. So if you say, I don't know, just be kind, but be kind and everything good is going to happen to you, that's absurd. No one's going to believe that, because it's not true. I've seen kind people and good things don't happen to them. I wish it was true for other people's sake, not mine, but other people, yes, but it just doesn't work like that. So if you're saying a true thing, you have to say it in a true way, and that requires a complicated, thought-provoking world. But anyway, back to the definition of art as a thought-provoking depiction, evoking specific emotion, usually through narrative. And so there is going to be some overlap between all the arts, and I'm going to use Renaissance arts to give you 6 principles that carry over into 21st century speculative fiction writing. The first one is light. So light in a painting, it just reveals. Light can kind of be used as different words, as with the same word with different meanings. Sometimes it means like happiness or softness, but that's not what I'm using it as here. I'm using it as illumination, or what is known. And this is a huge thing with narration. You've got some books like Rage of Dragons, where Tao is kind of just dancing down the slippery slope of sanity. You've got Gideon the Ninth, where Gideon is like, oh, girls, where? Oh, just kind of dumb. Well, not dumb, just distracted. And then you've got something like Once Upon a Burning Throne, where every time a character makes an important decision, there's kind of this pause and this deliberation based off the character's backstory that's immediately relevant, and whatever's just gone on before, the character's goals. This is not the more, in vogue style, but I think it's useful, at least in the sense of Once Upon a Time, Once Upon a Burning Throne, because it is this epic, it's based off the Mahabharata, so it's this legendary feel. By sitting with characters, by showing everything, you just have this grand scope, whereas something like Gideon the Ninth, Rage of Dragons, we're more settled into one character's mind, and so we're able to see who they are very well, but it leaves the rest of the world kind of out of focus. And so the more lights you cast on something, that, like I said, the more in focus it is. And so there's kind of like an inverse reaction in characters. If you cast more light on them, we're going to understand them more, we're probably going to feel for them more, but we're also going to know their struggles. When you have a character that's more powerful, that might be someone you want to keep out of focus, or someone who has, mixed motives, and they're like a sly trickster, maybe like someone like Gollum. You don't know what they're going to do yet, you don't trust them, but you have hope, but, not very good hope. And so having a more shadowy character allows them to be more ambiguous. Also, someone like Rob in A Song of Ice and Fire, he's a good character, but he probably seems better than he is because we're not in his head. He gets to be this kind of icon as opposed to an actual person whose mind we're seeing. So similarly, in setting, light familiarizes while shadow, the unknown, mystifies, and this is used in horror and mystery. The more you show of something, the less unsettling it is. No matter how crazily, scary, violent, whatever, it's probably not going to be as impactful as the reader's own imagination, because, as we've said, the imagination is kind of the medium for writing. And in plot, if you describe an action, a plan, dream, action twice, you kind of risk creating a double image. So unless you want to have that uncertainty or ambiguity, it's better to, show the plan and then just say, it went according to plan, or show the plan and then show how everything does not go according to plan. But to have a plan and then show how everything works according to the plan, it doesn't really do a lot for your story. It takes up words without giving anything new, unless there's some sort of secret involved, some sort of mystery that the reader has to uncover. The next principle is contrast. So this can be used in language. One of the most effective ways I've seen it was in the Iliad and the Odyssey. No surprise there, there's a reason there's a classics. In the Iliad, they take the most martial, violent scenes, and they compare it with domestic metaphors. And in the Odyssey, they take the more domestic scenes, home life, and they compare it with martial metaphors. And that contrast is it's just so jarring. It automatically brings it into focus. Just like in art, you have a chiaroscuro. Your eye is going to go where there's the darkest dark meeting the brightest bright. It's the same thing in literature, where you have a scene that starts out with a birth and ends in a death, or something, two opposites combining. This is where we're going to automatically be drawn. And it's kind of a common knowledge. If you want to see, talk about the horrors of war, you don't talk about all the bloody battles. You show like a kid's shoe, because that innocence, it goes in horror too. That innocence of a kid, or some, I don't know, whatever, some innocent person. I can't think of anyone innocent, besides a kid. But that kid compared to this dark situation, that contrast creates that intensity. And this is definitely a place to come up with your own, to make to your own contrast, because again, the kid thing, that's very overdone. There's a reason people do it, but there's got to be something else that you can think of besides that. In language itself, like I said, metaphors, but also just in plain language, noun adjective pairings, verb adverb pairings, even the verb you use to describe a person that's kind of, what someone is doing that's kind of disjointed with their situation, or something like a sad smile, slow jog. Someone, eagerly goes to do something that's terrible. Just that language itself can create that contrast. And the benefit of that is that, especially when you're trying to get published, there's a generalized word count for every genre. So you want to be as creative as you can with those words, while keeping your word count within that not restricted range, but ideal range. Next, after contrast, you have details. And the Renaissance art, they did not have the widest selection of scenes. They had a lot of Last Suppers, they had a lot of Madonna and Childs, a lot of Pietas, and so it's really easy to see the difference between great art and kind of more mediocre, because they're all showing the same thing. And it's similar now with genres. We're all working with similar tropes, but how you use them, how you show that realistic human detail, that makes it yours. That makes it, elevates it from something that's standard to something that could be good or great. And so in art, you see the arteries, you see the muscles, and they're all in the right place. Like, you could see David, and you could dissect that sucker, and it's just perfect. It's just a human person. The arteries, the muscles, everything is right, and that obviously carries over from art to writing, in how you describe a person, but also just the setting, how people live. I just read Upon a Burning Throne, and it depicts a world just unlike anything I've ever seen. It's based off of Marbata, but I was able to, using the imagination, to get all of it, because the details of who these people were, but also just how they lived, were so accurate, so spot on, that it just transferred. And not only these details of what is, and how the people physically are, but also the depictions of human emotions. And so it was a long plane ride, and I watched Mad Max Fury Road. I was not expecting it to be a great movie, but yeah, it was actually really good. And during the whole time, there's these cultist guys dying of radiation poison, and whenever they're about to go kamikaze, they say, "Witness me," and they do some crazy nonsense and die terribly. And I think there's something to that. There's this natural human desire to be seen, to witness me. You can go in Pompeii or some ruins and you'll see, yeah, Antonio was here in 200 BC. This desire to leave a mark, and because that is something I think everyone feels, we we react to seeing other people. That the most emotion you're going to get from your reader isn't by describing emotion so much as describing characters reacting to whatever's happening to them. So, moving to arts, there's Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, and this is something that there was a billion of them. That all the monks, all the monasteries, they would paint them in their dining rooms. Oh look, we're doing just what Jesus is doing. Isn't that nice? And it was kind of just like this bland scene everyone would have. Nothing wrong with it. But what made Leonardo da Vinci's work great, as opposed to all the literal thousands of others, was that he painted it at the precise moment when Christ tells his disciples, "One of you has betrayed me." And there's just pandemonium. Everyone is angry, scared, sad. They're people. And this huge emotional moment has just happened, and you see them react, and that their reaction informs your own. And so this the details come in the physical world, in the environments you build, but also just in this human reaction. So even in Stoic characters, you can give them something to react to. Even if they don't react, that is still a reaction. But for the most part, even it doesn't have to be dialogue. It can be a hesitation. It can be body language. It can even be a change of behavior afterwards. And when you're dealing with more emotional characters, you want to vary reactions. You don't want them to react the same way to everything. They should have varying degrees and differences. And then you can also do this out of character moments. And this is something you want to use sparingly, because if someone has too many out of character moments, it becomes their new personality. But use sparingly when a stoic character just blows up or breaks down, or when an emotional character just freezes up and loses everything. They're just the blank screen of death. This is probably one of the most powerful tools you can have to show what is happening matters, and to show that the character just cannot take it anymore. This is like a climax. This is it. Like, you cannot have a greater reaction than to just suddenly become, for at least a moment, a different person. Next, you have perspective. So, for some reason that I can't describe, I saw Hitler's art, and it was just bad. He's got like his windows right here are like front on, and then later they're like 45 degrees on like the same wall. And that's just not how perspective works, buddy. So when you have a character, you're gonna be kind of 2 degrees away from the character at all times. And that 1 degree of difference is just them being a different person. They're going to see things differently. Everyone does. They're going to process things differently. But then, and that's going to be subconscious to them. But then you've got this 2nd degree of separation, and that is conscious. That is them as a narrator choosing what to tell you, and that's going to be based off, their education level, their slang or whatever, location, time period, personality. If a tragedy hits, are they trying to laugh it off? Are they trying to make it sound worse than it is so they seem cool? This is something that how they're presenting themselves. So, perspective. You've got to take a note. Sorry, of those 2 degrees of separation, who they are and how they're presenting themselves. And if you want a different perspective on the same thing, there are 2 ways to do that. The main one, I think, probably, I'm not gonna say the better one. Never mind. The main one is to change the narrator. But some situations, some books, you only have one narrator. So in that case, if you want a different perspective on something, you can't change that first degree of separation. You can't really change who that character is unless, in the character arc or whatever. But the other way to change the perspective is through that second degree of separation. For some reason, that narrator chooses to present themselves in a different way for some reason. So either a different narrator or changing narrator, or narrator changing how they present themselves. Lastly, you have proportion. So if you mention something, it should have meaning, even as a red herring, or even as foreshadowing. And the more space you give something, obviously, the more important it seems. However, proportion is measured on its own. So if you have one sentence, and you stick it in the middle of a 20-page chapter, that's going to be something that's glossed over. So for something like foreshadowing, that's probably a good idea. Something that's plot relevant but not that interesting, probably a good idea. But let's say there's something very important, or just very important. That's really the best way of putting it. You could take that same one single sentence and you set it off as a paragraph or even as a chapter. And now that one single sentence, you're not increasing your word count at all, but that one single sentence goes from something that is just lost or glossed over to something that the reader is going to stop and ponder over, depending on how in-depth they want to be. So proportion is both how much time you spend on something, how many words, how many paragraphs you spend on something, but also how much that those words are given space for themselves. Proportion is not only for words, not only for scenes, but it's also with characters. And we've kind of talked about this with Illumination, but characters should usually, at least, be given screen time proportionate to the role in the story, unless, back to the Illumination, you're deliberately trying to conceal their motives. And corollary to that is, if you have a character who the narrative spends a lot of time on, even if they're not important to you, even if you don't think they're important to the narrative, because you've spent so much time on them, they're going to become important to the reader. And you have to deal with that. So, that's all I got for now. There's going to be a really exciting announcement I have later. I'm really tempted to do it today, but there's a couple things in the works that I want to settle first. So, if you like this, hit like and subscribe.